Okay, I'm going to begin the webinar. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kabir, and I'm with Barliver Research Group. I will be your host today. Today, we have Dr. Harkirat Kaur. She will be talking about corn production for silage and grazing, along with the benefits of crop production for corn production from the soil health perspective. Before we dive in, I'd like to take a moment to thank all the counties that support and fund us. Because of them, we are able to organize webinars like these for you. A quick housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the presentation, please hold them until the very end. We will have 15 minutes for Q&A session. However, if something urgent comes up or you need my help during the webinar, feel free to type it in the chat section. I will be keeping an eye on it throughout the session. Without further ado, let's begin today's webinar. And now please join me in welcoming our special guest speaker. Over to you, Dr. Harkirat.
Hi, Kabir. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I think it's kind of still the morning in Alberta, so we're still away from lunch. So I hope I won't interfere in that and wind up soon. Well, I'm Harkirat Kaur. I'm an assistant professor and extension specialist for corn production systems at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I run a program called Whisk Badger Corn, which is a corn agronomy group, and we do a lot of things corn. We do silage, we do grain, we do research trials, and some of those things I'll be sharing with you today, and also sharing a little bit on the perspective of how corn silage production might look for Western Canada or Alberta, and how things are, kind of taking a head start in your part of the world, actually. So before I dive into what's happening or what might be happening in Alberta or Western Canada soon, I just want to provide you an overall glance of how we look at silage in Wisconsin. So Wisconsin is the leading producer of corn for silage in the United States. And as per the 2025 USDA report, we had more than 800,000 acres of corn, which was harvested primarily for silage, and it resulted in the total production of closer to 19 million tons across the state. And we also saw a high bump in yield per acre, and the entire production was actually about 30% higher from what it was in 2024. So the increase in these numbers can be attributed to a lot of things, including how the weather was shaping up. 2025 was more of an average year. There was a lot of field working days available earlier in the season. So we primarily had timely plantings. We had a good spread of, uh, rains in June, and then it kind of crop was gearing up for a bumper yield year, for example. And silage is really important in Wisconsin's agronomic industry because we are a dairy state, and silage is one of the most convenient, and I would say one of the most high energy feed crops available to the dairy growers at this point. However, if we look at corn for silage in Alberta, things have been moving upwards in an upward trajectory from, I would say, early 2000s to until now, where the production numbers across Canada actually have doubled. And for Alberta, from 2019 to until now, there has been a steady increase, but we did see a little bit of a sharp decline from previous year, from 2023 to 2024. The 2025 numbers, I was still trying to find them. I couldn't. So if somebody has those numbers, please send them my way. I will be really interested in looking at them. When we look at the overall share of silage across Canada, the eastern part of the country is where most of the production is happening at this time. Primarily in Ontario, followed by Quebec, and now Manitoba and Alberta are also gearing up for diving into this production system and providing a lot of exciting opportunities for the future. Uh, So, when we look at silage corn, there are a number of decisions which are critical for the production and management of this system, because it's a holistic systems tool and not one decision can impact how your crop is going to look like. So, for most of the growers, the production or the management decisions begin with hybrid selection, where there are a number of factors that play a role, followed by planting date, what the population is going to be, how the row spacing will be looking like, how the in-season management for nitrogen and other nutrients, be it phosphorus, potash, or micronutrients, is going to look like. The decisions regarding weed and early season stress management are also critical, followed by the later season decisions related with harvest timing and how the yield and quality in terms of nutritive value would look like when those trade-offs or those decisions become critical because of a lot of things going on in the environment. So when we look at it from the holistic perspective, if we keep our corn plant at the center of the system, there are a lot of things which play a role, where we have a host plant or a corn plant which is in the center of the system. We have the environment, which is ever changing, unpredictable, playing a large role in how things will be shaping up. The presence of pathogens, the presence of inoculum around the area and in the field, and other external factors which might be from this, which might be from the perspective of soil management or any other pests that can invade the system. So all these decisions are critical for Alberta at this point, because we are increasingly seeing a rise in the feed costs. We are increasingly seeing climate variability. So that's where it is important to understand how these systems interact with each other, how the integration works, and how would it impact the overall production of silage corn for feed. So when we talk about silage corn, there are few things that need to be taken care of for considering a silage which is of good quality or good nutritive value. Number one, it has to be biomass yield. Nothing can overcome a poor yielding crop. You cannot basically suffice your needs if you don't have the yield. Secondly, it comes with the digestibility, because a high yielded feed, if is not digestible, is of no use to your cattle or no use to your yeah, livestock at all. Followed by nutritional composition of starch, protein, and how does the fiber looks like, and then eventually the overall energy content. So if we put this into perspective and divide it in different quadrants of quality analysis, the best silage hybrids are the ones which will fall into the high tonnage, high quality area. We can still make do with the silage which may have high tonnage and low quality. We can mm, we can change certain management decisions at the end that may help us in still utilizing this kind of feed, or even where we have a low tonnage, high quality. But what we cannot make do at all is something that lies in the low tonnage, low quality area. So all our decisions are geared towards promoting our produce or our end product, which lies into this region. So beginning with the hybrid selection, the number one the number one factor that counts when we have to look for hybrid selection in the system is obviously the yield potential. And in the regions where we are, even Wisconsin, and then as we move in the higher altitudes, which is the case with Alberta, we need to be very careful about how the relative maturity looks like. Why is that? Because it affects how the growing degree day units will accumulate across the season. So this division of short, medium, long hybrids can depend where you are sitting at this point. Because if you talk to a grower in Wisconsin, for them even 80 to 85 day relative maturity hybrid could be a shorter hybrid. But if you like move above in terms of, if you move to Alberta or if you move further north, that's not the case. So if a hybrid is a longer maturity hybrid, it will accumulate higher growing degree units across the season, which might mean that it can accumulate more dry matter eventually. However, these decisions depend a lot on the interaction of the hybrid selection RM with planting date, which we will come to in a bit. Then from yield potential, we also look at how the nutritive value of the hybrids is affecting the overall hybrid selection. For example, I have this these graphs from a study we did at MSU in 2019. And here we compared 4 different types of hybrids, starting from hybrids which were dual purpose to BMR to leafy and higher digestible fiber. Although we did see a higher yield in the dual purpose hybrids, we did have a lower digestibility in terms of fiber, in terms of neutral detergent fiber digestibility. And however, when we looked at it from the perspective of overall milk per ton, that is where your quality numbers kind of come to, I would say, a more concise measurement. Because because it kind of takes into account the digestibility of the fiber of the silage produced, and it also takes into account how much the dry matter is, how much percentage of the dry matter is being produced in a particular field. So we did see that there was a lot of variability across the fields, but but when we repeated this trial in a multi-year study, we did see that the dual hybrids were more stable, whereas the BMR hybrids had a higher digestibility level. So those are the decisions that we have to debate in terms of how the conditions look like, how prone the region is to a certain kind of, say, disease or insect infection, etc. Then the other thing that is very critical for hybrid selection is to look at insect protection traits, also looking at the disease resistant traits as well. For example, there are cry traits or whip traits which are which provide protection from various insect pathogens, insect pests such as European corn borer, western bean cutworm, which might be a potential issue for Alberta. At this point, a lot of hybrids with the Cry1 ABs and Cry1 Fs are resistant against European corn borer, but we are seeing incidents of this breach in resistance from the perspective of European corn borer in Eastern Canada, and a lot of research groups are focused on understanding how the stacking of these traits will eventually help us with more protected corn crop. Here I have a data chart from the multi-site year study that we did at Michigan State, and we did see that when we had BT proteins which were which were designed for protection against certain kind of yeah, insect pests, we saw a decrease in overall insect severity as across the region. And over here, the BTE hybrids were mostly cry hybrids, and the BTEW hybrids were the whip hybrids, which had insect protection against both Western bean cutworm and European corn borer. There are other traits that might be of interest, such as the corn rootworm, which is most likely at this point, because we don't have a lot of corn on corn rotations in Alberta, must be a low risk effort. And beyond that, we also need to be very careful about how the herbicide tolerance is playing a part in hybrid selection, because it is one of those decisions which will affect our overall weed management. Moving from hybrid selection, we come to the planting decisions, where number one is the planting time. And if we look at the growing season and how the temperature behaves, we need the ground to be at least above 50 degree Fahrenheit for about 3 days, in 3 consecutive days. And that's usually happening in Alberta around early to mid May. And sometimes it's easier to prioritize the planting planting earlier than delaying, because later planting would most generally mean yield penalty and dry down costs, because now now your crop does now you can't plant a high enough relative maturity, which could provide you a yield potential which was more accommodating in the conditions you are in. However, as you delay the planting, those growing degree units accumulation kind of limits, and eventually sometimes there are cases where the crop won't reach the adequate moisture levels for harvesting, which might add to your dry down costs or also have an impact on overall ensiling at the end. Beyond that, for plant populations, generally 10 to 15% higher than grain populations are sustainable. But for central and western Canada, maybe pushing for more than this won't work, because that also creates a overall competition between the plants. And because the environment is not warm enough, or won't be able to support a high competitive environment enough, so pushing that might actually work in an opposite direction than we are looking at. When we look at nutrient management, there are certain limitations to nitrogen mineralization. Although the soils of central and western Canada are the fertile prairie soils, but nitrogen can be a limiting factor because of the cooler springs. And the way around it is to actually apply nitrogen in a way that it aims for efficiency. So having a split dose earlier in the season might be more effective. However, pushing the nitrogen rate to very high might not work, especially in the later season, the overall because the overall plant reaches a plateau after a point. And any more nitrogen application might actually affect your soil health in terms of nitrate leaching, and soil health and water in terms of nitrate leaching. With respect to sulfur and other micronutrients, in earlier the sulfur wasn't a part of as much of conversation, because it was mostly available through the atmospheric deposition. But with more industrial regulation, there has been a decline in overall sulfur deposition. And now it is generally recommended to test your soils for any deficit in sulfur and other micronutrients such as zinc, etc. And especially if you have low organic matter conditions in your soils. Moving forward from nutrient management, we look at how the harvest timing and how those decisions can impact the overall performance for corn silage eventually. So the adequate target moisture or the for silage harvest is generally anywhere between 60 to 65, or sometimes even up to 70% of moisture. And the main reason behind it is that we need the dry matter enough to actually be appropriate for the ensiling procedure that follows the harvest. Because if the silage is too on the drier side, it will result in a in a silo which has higher porosity that would impact the overall fermentation. A more moist silage might lead to seepage losses and other other fungal contamination or yeast contamination as well, which will overall compromise the quality of the feed at the feed out phase. There are few tricks, or there were few ways of looking at the moisture. Number one is the milk line, where you can target for say a half milk line, and that kind of provides you an estimate of when to harvest silage. However, most recent research increasingly have shown poor correlation between overall moisture or dry matter with the milk line numbers that we see. So it's best to actually kind of sample an area of the field and just maybe pop your harvested sample into a microwave and dry it until you get a stable weight, and that's where you can estimate your moisture and decide on how you're going to decide for how you're going to decide for your harvest decisions. There are a few things that need to be of cognizance when we are deciding for harvest timing. If there is a frost stress that's being anticipated, it is better to harvest before than later if the crop is about to reach the desired moisture range, because it might eventually result in loss of quality in terms of loss of digestibility. And if the region is more prone to say fungal infections such as fusarium, primarily causing, Gibberella or Fusarium ear rots. It might eventually result in a higher mycotoxin accumulation if the crop is staying in the field for too long. Uh, During the harvest decisions, another important deciding factor is where to make the cut at, where to harvest it. So, obviously, when we increase the harvest height, we see a decline in overall tonnage that we get from an acre. However, there is an increase in overall quality parameters that we do see. So, over here, if you pay close attention to it, and if you see that with increase in 6 inches of cutting height, we are seeing about a 8% decline in the overall yield, but we are also seeing about a 6 to 8% increase in the milk per ton. However, there is however, estimating the adequate moisture levels at that point become critical, because as you're increasing the plant height, those numbers, they vary quite a bit. There has been a simulated study by one of my colleagues' student at UW Madison, and they went all in to test different height variations from 10, 25, and 40 inches. And they observed that with each increase with an inch of an increase, we were seeing an increase of 0.2% in digestibility. However, our dry matter was decreasing by 0.6% per inch. So it becomes very So it becomes a very crucial decision to make, like what are the trade-offs we are deciding to make, what are the primary use case for the overall silage feed, and how is it going to eventually factor in on what we are trying to do for our cattle, or what the end purpose of the cattle and livestock is eventually. So this is how we kind of manage, or we kind of navigate around the decisions of planting, to nutrients, to hybrid selection, to overall harvesting management. However, there is another way of actually managing silage, and that kind of becomes a concept of grazing corn, where there's a lot of flexibility that grazing corn might provide the growers with, because it's obviously a high energy feed source, and it can help us overcome certain challenges with respect to harvesting, and also kind of saves some of the costs that are related with harvesting and storage. Secondly, it can also provide an opportunity for a corn crop that's damaged, I would say, with a late hailstorm, or has a more and it becomes hard to harvest that in time. So those are the opportunities that the grazing corn might provide. At this point in Wisconsin, there are very few acres which are planned for grazing corn, and that is true for much part of Canada as well. Most of the growers opt for grazing corn if they don't really have an option for harvesting the silage for that, or they opt for they opt for grazing corn, or they let their cattle graze corn, which is the residue actually that's left after harvesting the silage. However, if we look at it from a plant perspective, the hybrids that might be helpful in terms of grazing corn has a higher room for opportunity in terms of relative maturity, because at this point you're not concerned about harvesting and storing the crop at a certain time. You can play with the longer maturity and not be worried about it inculcating into or accumulating into your dry down costs eventually, which means it also would provide you with more flexibility. However, in that case, you need a hybrid which has a higher standability and which is low on the lodging risks, because otherwise it will lead to accessibility issues in the field as well. For planting, I mean, it is similar to harvestable silage. It may support higher populations, but word of caution, you don't need to push towards as high population that it eventually creates a problem for you. So when a grower needs to decide if they actually want to plan for if they actually want to plan for grazing corn specifically right from the start, there are a few questions that need to be answered. Number one is like, is it possible that the moisture content will be slightly higher or equal to 60 before the first frost? If that is, then then you move on to the next step. If that's not, then the primary goal is that if the moisture levels are going to decrease rapidly, you harvest it for silage, because at that point it's not going to be beneficial for your livestock, and it's not going to be beneficial even, and if you delay the harvest at that point, it's not going to be beneficial or appropriate for your ensiling purposes as well. If that's not the case, and if it is actually going to be around the desired moisture levels, then the second step is to understand the accessibility in winter, and is the field still going to be well drained? If it is going to be well drained, Then we move to the next step of understanding the standability and the lodging risk of the hybrids. And if it's not, we move towards again harvesting, deciding it to harvest it for silage at an appropriate time. So if we are observing the standability, and if the hybrids have a rating for low lodging tolerance, it's better to decide for harvesting it. And if it has a good standability, it has enough stock strength rating that it can withstand a late season strong wind situation. We move on to the other uh, other scenarios of if we have site-specific forage quality testing options, if we have protein and fiber supplements so that the cattle is satiated enough, both in terms of quality and quantity of produce. If yes, we move to the next step. If no, we go back to deciding on primarily harvesting it for our silage purposes using our appropriate equipment. Then the next step is to understand and evaluate if we have options for backups in case of crusting or high snow, when the accessibility or the ability of the livestock to go in the field and graze corn kind of becomes limited. If yes, then it could actually be a desirable situation where you can decide to actually keep your field for grazing and not go for harvest for silage. But at this point, most of this decision making happens as the situation kind of evolves in the growing season. There are few things that are very specific for Alberta or for central Canada when we need to look at that, and that's primarily because of the weather situation we have there, and it includes a heavy September frost. So if you're having a heavy September frost, there is a high chance that the moisture numbers for the moisture and the dry down numbers for the silage would be all over the place. Secondly, if there is a severe drought stress in the season, that would impact the overall standability and the ability of the crop to be at an adequate moisture level for your cattle or for your livestock to actually graze. Then then the early season snow can also be a detrimental situation. And then if there are issues with adequate protein sourcing, that might be not a very good decision in terms of your livestock performance as well. So when we look at these stresses, we obviously have to look at the stress management options as well. So the number one stress that grazing corn might experience is nitrate risk, and that kind of comes primarily if you have had a dry season, if you have had a early frost, or if you have had late season nitrogen applications or high nitrogen applications which were way too high for what the soil test might have been showing. Or and so in order to manage these, it is obviously recommended to test the stressed fields before grazing to identify if the forage or if the feed in there is actually adequate for grazing purposes, or if it needs to be supplemented with silage additives in the ensiling situation. With moving from there, we do experience acidosis in terms of livestock health impacts, and that comes in situations where we have a very high starch crop in the field, and there is an unrestricted access to the cattle to the field, and it might result from overconsumption of corn silage at that point. The best scenario to kind of come around this situation would be to actually have specific strip gaze control systems in place, strip graze control systems in place, and also having adequate supplementation in order to ensure that the overall nutritive value of the crop is intact. Moving from there, obviously, we have issues with the snow depth and ice crusting. We might have deer damage. We might have, those situations going around. And then the best way to come around these is to actually, maybe using parameter fencing, or also, maintaining a backup field, which does not put your livestock or cattle at a risk of not receiving enough nutrition during the off season. Beyond that, when we look at silage corn from the perspective of soil health, both in terms of silage harvest systems and grazing systems, it is a very high demanding crop. So, and it also removes a lot of nutrients from the ground as well. However, it is important to acknowledge that when working in a system, it can actually be dealt in a more sustainable way. So corn silage systems generally produce anywhere between 10 to 18 tons of dry matter for a year, for an hectare, if we look at it from that perspective. Of this, most of that is kind of, harvested out, and then about 20 to 30% is where we have roots that contribute to the overall organic matter or soil carbon. Uh, And if we look at it from the perspective of grazing, beef cattle grazing, when it deposits manure in the field, it can actually meet about anywhere between 20 to 40% of the crop's nitrogen. And if you are planning manure applications, that may actually cover 40 to 60% of the nitrogen cost, depending on the overall nitrogen mineralization and the weather conditions around. And then overall, it has been reported from research across various universities and industry that soil organic matter gains of anywhere between 0.2 to 0.5 tons of carbon per hectare per year has been reported when the systems are integrated in a way that they have adequate applications of manure and overall nitrogen applications in a way which are timed properly. So in an overall system, we have a cycle that plays around where no doubt corn crop takes a lot from the soil, but when integrated with adequate management practices, it can return uh, it can return the it can return at least half of what it takes from the soil back to the ground. So as we move from silage harvest systems to grazing systems, I would like to highlight another novel concept that we are actually evaluating at this time in the silage corn world, and that is short corn. And it is a new, relatively newer kind of hybrids which are genetically and selectively bred with BR2 mutation genes, where it has a reduced plant stature, and the height is anywhere between 30 to height is anywhere reduced anywhere between 30 to 40% of the traditional corn plant. And what we see is that the what we see is that when we look at the plant, it starts showing differences after V8 V9, and it has smaller internodes, but the number of leaves are the same, which means as silage producers it is still providing enough foliage. However, there is however, in addition to having smaller internodes, it also has a ear which is closer to the ground, which overall impacts the overall center of mass for the plant, and hence improve its standability and reduces its risk to lodging. Here I have a picture from the storm that hit Midwest around August 2020. And when we are hit with storms later in the season, we can suffer yield losses anywhere between 10% to 25%, depending on what stage it is being hit at. Secondly, it is a different plant architecture. So we assume or we expect it to have a higher nutrient and water use efficiency. And then at the end, it also provides an easy accessibility for in-season management of fungicides, insecticides, or late-season nutrient management in the crop. So in order to see how is this system or how is this hybrid faring into our silage production systems, we conducted small plot trials where we tested three different types of hybrids, where we had BMR, tall, and short hybrids, and both in 2024 and 2025. In 2024, shotgun hybrids had comparable yields for tall hybrids, whereas for 2025, we did see a decline in comparison with the tall hybrids. However, these reductions were less than these reductions were less than 8 to 7% of the what tall conventional hybrids have been yielding. We also wanted to look at the performance of short corn hybrids from the perspective of nutritive value, and that's where the starch analysis came into picture. What we saw was, although the starch numbers in 2024 were comparable to our tall hybrids, we did have a lot of variability. However, as we moved in 2025, because we were trying to eliminate the hybrids that were on the lower end of the production, we did see a lot less variability, but the overall average percentage yield of starch also reduced. So that might actually be coming from the differences in the weather conditions in 2024 and 2025, where 2024 the weather was more abrupt, more we had we had dry spells, and then we had a lot of rain, then we again had a dry spell, and that kind of situation. So it might be possible that in a year where weather predictability is low, short hybrids might fare well. In an average year, they might not. So at this point, there are a lot of unanswered questions there. So therefore, I just want to provide a disclaimer that this is the preliminary data that I'm presenting, but it is something which is upcoming and new, and which we are excited to look at this point. From the perspective of digestibility, the short hybrids in 2024 were comparable to BMR and tall hybrids. Some hybrids yielded a higher, some hybrids had a digestibility which was higher than 67-68%, but there were also the ones which were closer to 58-59% as well. So there was a lot of variability there as well. In 2025, we did not see any hybrid yielding higher than 65%. So there is a lot of unanswered ambiguity here at this point, which we are hoping to answer with the repeated trials going forward in future. Beyond the standalone systems, we also wanted to see how the short corn silage kind of fares in a system where we have interseeded forage crops such as alfalfa. So here we had different short corn and tall corn hybrids, and we interseeded them with interseeded some of the plots with alfalfa varieties, and we wanted to look at primarily how the short corn yield appears for silage at this point. And what we saw was that obviously the tall corn hybrids had higher yield in terms of the plain dry yield numbers. However, when we looked at the relative dry yield, we did find an interesting trend. So if we look at tall hybrids with no alfalfa as a overall conventional system and say it has 100% relative yield, when we introduce alfalfa with tall hybrids, we see a yield loss of about 9%. But when we have a short hybrid with no alfalfa in the system, and when we introduce alfalfa into that system, the yield penalty is relatively just 3%. Therefore, we are seeing that if a grower already has a short corn system, introducing alfalfa into it might not actually lead to a high yield draft and provide a higher opportunity for a silage and a forage system where you have both high energy, high protein silage systems, high protein, high energy forage systems going hand in hand, and also providing more flexibility and opportunity for the livestock basically. With that, I would just like to summarize everything with few takeaways. So when we are growing silage in diverse environments ranging from Midwest America to Central Canada, Western Canada, there has to be a lot of decisions that need to be taken care of, and the critical ones that impact the yield potential the more ranges from hybrids to planting dates to eventually harvest timings. Therefore, at the beginning of the season, matching hybrid maturity to shorter growing seasons becomes very critical. Secondly, when we look at grazing corn opportunities, it has to happen from a systems perspective where intakes, nitrates, and winter risks are actively managed and the resources that a grower has are taken into account for. Moving on, in both kind of systems, we have nitrogen and nutrient management that has to be efficient, and it has to derive not only the yield but also take care of the soil health and manage a system in a way it is sustainable for a longer period of time. Overall, corn is a systems tool. Whether it's short corn, whether it's traditional corn, it is a systems tool, and it can perform the best when it is integrated with the livestock, when it is integrated with good residue management, and when it is integrated with overall cover crop systems management, where it provides more opportunity for the growers. And before I end, I would just like to plug in some research trials or some hybrid testing trials that we do in our lab. So here is the, if you scan this QR code, it is the Wisconsin Corn Hybrid Performance Trials report, and it takes you to the hybrid testing data that we do for silage and grain every year. You can also participate in these trials if you want. You can reach out to me and we can see how we can make do of these things. Beyond that, we in our corn agronomy lab, we do a lot of other kind of research trials where we have private public partnerships, we have long-term rotation trials, we have research trials where we again answer management questions. And with that, I would just like to thank all the amazing people and the funding agencies that help us with the research and the amazing work that we're able to do. And I would end with showing you a beautiful picture of our team of 4 people and take any questions that you may have. I hope I'm on time. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Harkirat. Now we'll open the floor for Q&A session. If there's any question, you can type it in the Q&A section, or if there's someone who doesn't like typing, I can allow them to talk and they can ask their questions. So we already have 4 questions out here. So the first question is, should ear flex dictate plant populations? Fixed versus flex versus semi-flex? Do flex ear hybrids tend to have larger roots masses and do better with low moisture condition versus fixed ear hybrids?
So I personally have not looked into this research question, but one of my colleagues down in Indiana. He is looking at it, and there are certain differences in root masses. I might not be able to recall if what his research has been showing, because I just saw his presentation 2 weeks ago, and it's kind of a little bit of a blur at this point. But yes, obviously, when you have larger root masses, it will be more it will be more high performing in the cases where you have lower moisture conditions, and if in case you are dealing with drought situations at this point. And that is also one thing that even in short corn we are trying to understand, because it is uh, it is supposed to have a root system which is more extensive than the tall corn. So we are trying to identify if that is also contributing it to have a higher standability. So yeah, I know it's not the exact answer that you might be looking for, but I can definitely find more on this for you if you reach out to me. Thanks.
Perfect. Hopefully that answers your question. So the next person is asking, never talked about phosphorus with seed, which is important.
Yeah, so a lot of soils that we deal with in Wisconsin and the soils that I have researched on do not really have a phosphorus deficit at this point. But I understand that as we move to different parts of the state and the country, those situations uh, come into display. And phosphorus obviously is an important nutrient factor that needs to obviously be taken into account. And I'm not really sure what the exact question is, but I've not talked about phosphorus
I think
because
so.
I
They're
have not
just
researched on it. So
they were
I
just
don't.
asking if you could cover something about phosphorus and seed with. They thought it's important and
Yeah, no, it is
yeah,
important for sure.
yeah.
I have personally not looked into it, but yes, I think especially in sandy soils, it might be a question that needs to be taken care of with a higher priority.
Perfect. So next question is, should a person be cautious about the type of starch in these hybrid when grazing? Flint versus dent versus flowery. When I when I graze flowery starch, my manure sample come back at almost 100% TTSD, which next to no passage through my cows.
Yeah, so it is the type of starch and how digestible it is a critical question for animal health, and it has to be important in that way. And most of the data that I was showing was from dent corn. So I wouldn't be able to comment on how it looks like versus for flowery corn at this point. But yes, your starch digestibility needs to be on the higher side for sure, and that is where the hybrid selection also comes into play. And talking to your seed agent, seed rep of the company is the best thing that you can do, I think, while making a decision on how to look at silage from the starch digestibility perspective.
Perfect. What type of starch on the short corn hybrids did you look at starch solubility?
So we still have our samples that we need to test for starch solubility and digestibility, because the equation. So just to be completely transparent, the nutritive value numbers I showed were from NIR equations. They are not from the feed studies. So we have been trying to collaborate with the animal nutritionist, and and the NIR equations that we were using were not giving us starch solubility. So we don't have those numbers at this point.
Perfect. Never grown corn before, but does it do better on lighter land or heavier?
So, I mean, corn is a high demanding crop. It does really well on high organic matter soils, but it is driven a lot by how nitrogen mineralization work in your field. So if nitrogen is not a binding factor, that's where I would probably plant.
Perfect. What about leaf on plants? Do you see difference between leafy plants, minimum 3 to 13 leaves versus grain corn, 6 to 7 from a digestive perspective?
Yeah, so there were, I would say, there were differences, marginal differences when I was looking at that data. Those differences did not translate into statistical differences because there was a lot of variability when we were looking at the leafy corn hybrids. Those hybrids, they did have a higher digestibility, but it was it was a lot of variability that we were seeing in there. That's why the numbers didn't translate into when we put it into the statistical model, and so there was a lot of deviation. Yeah.
Perfect. What heat units are the short corn in your trials?
So they were anywhere between, I think our shortest one was 102 relative maturity, and the longest one was 107, which I know is not acceptable for central Canada. And at this point, the seed companies don't really have a hybrid which is high yielding, or they have not actually given that to us for testing. Which is on the lower side of relative maturity and heat units than 102 RM.
Perfect. Hopefully that answers your question. And another one is there a standard seed placement blend that should be applied via liquid fertilizer and which are critical elements to use when seeding, including micronutrients?
So for micronutrients, I would say specifically with respect to sulfur and zinc, those are the two primary ones that at this point are a lot in conversation, and they have been kind of, also seen to be limiting in a lot of soils. At uh, the hard part about doing a sulfur research is that in Wisconsin specifically, we have a very hard time locating the fields which are sulfur deficit. So a lot of research trials that we do, I would say, in a greenhouse setting or in a small plot setting, is not representative of what's happening in the state. And I'm sorry, I forgot the other half of the question. I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay. I think so. I deleted that.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So whose question was that? If you can maybe
Can they
re-add that.
retype it? Oh, I see. I found it. I found it. So the question was, is there a standard seed placement blend that should be applied via liquid fertilizer? And which are critical elements to use when seeding, including micronutrients?
So a critical seed placement blend usually would have an NPK ratio, and that could I. So I'm not a soil scientist, so I always am cautious about recommending a seed placement blend in that way. Uh, So I would always recommend that you test your soil and you talk to your local soil agronomist before going in with a placement blend. And so yeah, I don't really feel comfortable in recommending that at this point. I'm sorry to disappoint you in that, but yes, I think it is something which has to be driven by your soil test and also your local soil recommendations.
Perfect. We've wait another 2 minutes. Do type your questions. If there's any more questions, by the time I would like to make a quick announcement about our upcoming workshops. We have a crop production workshop on February 26th. If somebody wants to come or is interested, it's in Stettler. It's this Thursday. Do register by tomorrow. And then we have an environmental farm plan in Stettler on March 3rd. If anybody has not done the environmental farm plan, do register for that. And then we have a farm succession and insurance workshop on March 5th. Register for that if somebody's interested. And last one I want to make an announcement is about our AGM for this year. It's on March 26th, and the speakers we have coming is on fertility management for our principles. If somebody's interested, do register for that one. Are there any more questions? Is there anything else, Dr. Harkirat, you want to add on to your presentation? We will wait another minute. Somebody has
Yeah.
more questions.
So, yeah, I mean, thank you for having me, and I'm sorry about some of the answers which I
No,
did
no,
not
like,
answer specifically because
yeah.
that's that as a uh, as an agronomist and as a researcher, I refrain from giving specifics when I don't have them myself. So that's a disclaimer I would like to give. And secondly, if you are interested in reaching out to me uh, with feedback or wanting more information, here are my credentials on screen. Please feel free to email me or call me, and I will try my best to find an answer for your question, or if not, maybe direct you to a person who can actually provide an answer better than me. So yeah.
Okay, I guess there is another question.
Mhm.
What is a good heat unit for Central Alberta?
So, looking at the trends from last 5 years, I would say anywhere between an 80 and 78 to 82. So basically, like 80 is the average, and it kind of obviously limits some of the yield potential that you may receive. But if you are in, I would say, southern part of Alberta, you might push towards 85, and if you go towards the northern part of the state, you might want to stay on the 77, 78 kind of a range with respects to relative maturity.
Perfect. So somebody's asking, Wainwright area. Jaden, can you clarify your question? I'm confused what he's asking. So I have another question until then. Could you look at historical heat unit maps?
So we did look at the historical heat unit maps for United States. We didn't find collaborators at that point in Canada. So if you have a collaborator, we will be very interested in. So we actually created a heat units and relative maturity map for United States, which is published in Agronomy Journal, and it provides you an overall look on how the relative maturity and heat unit changes in the corn belt in United States. And I think for Canada, there's a great opportunity if we have access to long-term data and if there are collaborators interested in that. So yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I guess
I hope that's what
Jaden,
they meant. I'm sorry if I
yeah,
misunderstood the question.
I think so. That's what they meant. Yeah. Okay, I guess then I don't see any more questions, so we will just conclude the webinar.
Mhm.
Thank you, Dr. Harkirat, for answering those questions, and it was an amazing presentation. It was truly a pleasure to have you with us today. That brings an end to our webinar. Thank you all for attending. We hope you found this webinar very informative and useful and enjoyed the discussion. If you have any feedback or suggestion about future topics, feel free to share them via email. Have a great day and look forward to seeing you at our future workshops and webinars.
Sure.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.